Forget fancy gourmet dinners. Before delivery apps, Canadian kitchens were the epicenters of ingenuity, where parents turned humble ingredients into hearty meals for 6 on a shoestring budget. The 60s, 70s, and 80s defined frugal comfort food: the casserole, cream of mushroom soup, and the almighty potato. This style used cheap carbohydrates to stretch smaller portions of protein, proving that full bellies don't require a fat wallet. The tuna noodle casserole is the quintessential Canadian comfort dish of the 1960s, emblematic of how a few inexpensive, shelf-stable ingredients could be transformed into a filling dinner. The masterstroke of economy lies in the sheer ratio of inexpensive egg noodles to the protein. A single can of tuna, which was the most expensive component, was completely distributed across the generous bulk of the pasta. The binder was the era's culinary adhesive, a can of ubiquitous cream of mushroom soup, or sometimes cream of celery, thinned with milk or water to form a rich, savory, and voluminous sauce. This sauce, heavy with fat and flavor, effectively masked the modesty of the tuna portion. A can of cheap canned peas added color, vegetable matter, and additional volume without adding significant cost. The dish was baked until bubbly, and a final flourish was the crunchy topping, often a handful of crushed saltine crackers, cheap potato chips, or dry breadcrumbs, added to ensure a satisfying textural crunch that contributed to the meal's feel of abundance. This high-carb, high-fat, high-volume meal was guaranteed to fill 6 people cheaply. The frugal genius of shepherd's pie, or cottage pie, as it was often called when made with ground beef, lies in its strategic, economical layering. The bottom layer, which provides the flavor, uses a relatively minimal amount of ground beef. This meat portion is cooked down with a generous amount of inexpensive diced root vegetables, carrots, onions, and often a handful of frozen peas, which effectively bulk up the protein layer, ensuring meat flavor in every bite without requiring much actual meat. The mixture is bound and moistened by a simple gravy made from flour, beef broth, or even water thickened with cornstarch. The true star, however, is the thick, fluffy cap of mashed potatoes. Made from the cheapest bulk potatoes and enriched with milk and a small amount of butter or margarine, this dense, high-starch layer provides the bulk and satiety for the entire family. Baking the pie until the potato topping is golden and crusty not only seals in the flavor, but adds a textural richness that makes the meal feel complete and highly satisfying. Meatloaf was the ultimate vehicle for turning a small amount of ground beef into a massive, family-sized dinner. The frugal secret was the systematic replacement of costly protein with cheap, high-volume extenders. Instead of being pure meat, the loaf mixture incorporated copious amounts of soaked breadcrumbs or stale bread, oatmeal, or crushed crackers, all moistened with milk. These ingredients absorb the meat's juices and flavor while swelling significantly during baking, creating a dense, satisfying loaf much larger than the meat content alone would suggest. Finely chopped onions and eggs were also used for binding and flavor. The cheap but savory topping was typically a simple glaze made from ketchup and brown sugar. This high-volume loaf was almost never served alone. It was consistently paired with a massive serving of mashed potatoes made from cheap bulk spuds and smothered in a gravy made from the pan drippings or a simple packet mix, ensuring a high-calorie, deeply comforting meal. This dish is arguably one of the cheapest family meals imaginable, a classic example of survival cooking done right in Canadian homes. Its entire premise relies on the pure volume and filling power of elbow macaroni, one of the most inexpensive pastas available. After being cooked until tender, the macaroni is stirred into a large quantity of canned, stewed, or crushed tomatoes. To minimize cost, the sauce was seasoned minimally with just salt, pepper, and perhaps a touch of dried basil or oregano, eschewing expensive herbs and spices. The meal historically contained little to no meat. Any perceived richness was strategically added via a simple pat of butter or margarine stirred in at the end, or occasionally a sprinkle of cheap processed cheese. The magic is in the expansion. The porous, starchy macaroni absorbs the acidic, watery tomatoes. This process causes the volume of the dish to swell dramatically, providing a massive, comforting, and inexpensive serving for 6. The result is a high-volume, high-carbohydrate dish that delivered maximum energy and satiety for mere pennies per person. This dish is a clever, Canadianized simplification of the labor-intensive Eastern European holashkis, executed with a frugal twist. The strategy is twofold. The wrap is the incredibly cheap and fibrous cabbage leaf, or often just shredded cabbage mixed in, which provides bulk for almost no cost. Secondly, the expensive traditional ground pork and beef filling is replaced or significantly reduced in favor of cheap white rice and thinly sliced, inexpensive hot dogs or wieners. The mixture is rolled or layered and baked in a sauce made from a simple can of tomato soup thinned with water. The rice swells, the cabbage is incredibly hearty and takes up volume, and the hot dogs provide a strong, cheap, satisfying meat flavor that permeates the entire dish, resulting in a large, savory, and incredibly dense meal. Chili is the quintessential meat extender for family budgets. To feed 6 economically, the bulk of the dish came from cheap, high-fiber, high-protein dried beans, kidney, pinto, or a mixture, which are incredibly inexpensive when bought in bulk and expand dramatically when cooked. The small amount of ground beef used was strategically browned and allowed to simmer for hours, allowing its fat and flavor to thoroughly permeate the massive volume of the canned crushed tomatoes and water/stock base. The long, slow cooking process not only tenderizes the beans, but perfectly integrates the spices and meat flavor. As a final act of frugal genius, chili was universally served over a generous mound of cheap white rice or alongside squares of inexpensive cornbread, ensuring serious, sustained satiety. This meal strategy was a common, pragmatic approach to turning an inexpensive pantry staple into a substantial main course. Rather than cooking beans from scratch, Canadian families often bought large, cheap cans of commercial baked beans, like Heinz or Campbell's. The key was the home doctoring process. The beans were poured into a baking dish and mixed with cheap, flavor-boosting additions. These often included chopped onions, a generous swirl of molasses or brown sugar for sweetness, a dollop of mustard, and, most crucially, small scraps of cheaper, fattier meat like diced side pork, bacon ends, or sliced hot dogs. Baking them slowly created a dense, sweet, smoky, and incredibly satisfying main course, relying almost entirely on the huge fiber and protein content of the beans for bulk. Chicken a la King is a masterclass in using a flavorful, rich sauce and a cheap starch base to create a substantial meal with minimal expensive protein. It utilized only a very small amount of pre-cooked or leftover chicken, or often the most economical canned chicken, suspended in a velvety sauce. The sauce itself was the volume creator, a classic French-inspired roux made from butter, flour, and milk broth, and bulked up with frozen or canned peas, pimientos, or red pepper bits. The final critical piece of the frugal puzzle was the vehicle, serving the mixture over thick, plain, toasted slices of white bread or cheap, fluffy homemade biscuits. The heavy, starchy base absorbed the creamy sauce, creating a rich, satisfying mouthfeel that brilliantly disguised the meager amount of chicken used. Traditional stew is inherently hearty, but the frugal version relied on the power of starch filler. If beef was used, it was the cheapest, toughest stewing beef cut into small cubes. Often, the stew was largely just the cheapest root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and celery in a flavorful, herby stock. The masterstroke for feeding six was skipping the expensive refrigerated pastry dough for a pie crust. Instead, simple cheap biscuit or dumpling dough was mixed and dropped directly onto the simmering stew near the end of the cooking process. These dumplings steamed and cooked in the broth, swelling dramatically to provide incredible density, bulk, and a comforting textural element, ensuring all six people were thoroughly filled. This ingenious dish is a perfect example of a dual-carb, low-meat strategy. It earns its name because uncooked white rice is mixed directly into the small portion of seasoned ground beef. The meatballs are then simmered in a large volume of sauce, typically made from an inexpensive can of tomato soup and water. As the meatballs cook, the rice absorbs the liquid and swells, literally popping out of the meatball like porcupine quills. This process effectively doubles the volume and weight of the meatball and the overall meal, creating a high-carb, low-meat serving that is inherently filling. The dish was usually served either alone as a complete meal or over a side of more cheap white rice for maximum satiety. This meal became a beloved budget staple of the 1980s, largely due to the affordability and convenience of bulk-bought frozen Perogies, which are incredibly cheap, high-volume foods. The frugal brilliance lies in the double-carb filler, potato and cheese encased in dough, creating a remarkably dense and satisfying base. Frying the Perogies in butter or margarine added essential fat and richness, transforming the simple dumplings into a comforting high-calorie meal that easily filled a family of six. The high-impact frugal hack was the strategic use of a single inexpensive coil of smoked Kielbasa. Sliced thin and fried with caramelized onions, this fatty, highly flavored sausage served as a potent seasoning for the entire massive batch. The Kielbasa's strong, smoky, and salty flavor permeated the whole dish, imparting a meaty savoriness without requiring an expensive quantity of meat per serving, resulting in maximum satiety and flavor for minimal cost. This meal was less a recipe and more a foundational budget strategy. A huge pot of soup was created using the cheapest bulk vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and celery. To achieve a creamy texture without the expense of heavy cream, the soup was often thickened with a simple roux or, more commonly, an inexpensive can of evaporated milk. The soup provides excellent volume and warmth for very little money. The necessary protein and carb accompaniment was the simple grilled cheese sandwich. Made with the cheapest white bread and universally available processed cheese slices, the sandwich was grilled in butter or margarine, providing the fat, salt, and concentrated protein needed to cement the feeling of a complete, comforting meal. The spaghetti with canned sauce, the minimal meat edition, a true family favorite of the 1980s, prioritized bulk and flavor intensity over expensive ingredients to feed a family of six economically. The frugal strategy centered on cooking a massive quantity of spaghetti, which served as the inexpensive high-volume foundation. The sauce itself was built from an inexpensive can of store-brand tomato sauce or soup, meticulously stretched with water and concentrated with cheap tomato paste. This paste was crucial as it deepened the color and flavor intensity, expertly giving the illusion of a richer, slow-simmered sauce without the corresponding cost. Crucially, the expensive protein ground beef was strategically used as a flavor enhancer. Only a modest portion was included, and it was often bulked up with cheap fillers like breadcrumbs or oatmeal before cooking. This extended meat was heavily seasoned with dried herbs and garlic powder to ensure its savory essence and texture were maximized, despite its minimal physical presence across the 6 substantial servings. The resulting dinner was a comforting, high-volume meal that delivered maximum satiety and flavor while maintaining a minimal food cost. The taco salad with crushed chips was a truly iconic, economical convenience meal of the 1980s, brilliant in its use of cheap, processed fillers to stretch a minimal amount of expensive protein. The core frugal strategy was transforming a modest portion of seasoned ground beef into a massive, satisfying salad. The volume came from a huge base of inexpensive iceberg lettuce and cheap canned kidney beans. The crucial, low-cost component that delivered the necessary satiety, flavor, and crunch was the liberal inclusion of crushed corn chips, such as Fritos or Doritos. These chips, being relatively cheap in bulk, provided the essential fat, salt, and high caloric content that ensured satisfaction. They served as a clever, high-flavor carbohydrate substitute for rice or tortillas, effectively making the small quantity of seasoned beef feel substantial, savory, and plentiful across all 6 large servings. This quirky, economical meal was a staple of 1980s frugal cooking, cleverly relying on processed starches for bulk to feed a large family cheaply. The base started with a small, budget-conscious portion of protein, usually ground beef or cheap canned chicken combined with the ubiquitous 80s casserole binder, a can of cream of mushroom soup, which provided smooth, rich volume. Diced celery added a simple vegetable stretch, and a critical dash of soy sauce imparted a deep, savory, umami-rich flavor. This seasoning was essential for making the minimal ingredients taste complex and satisfying. The masterstroke was the deployment of the filler, a massive volume of inexpensive, crunchy canned Chow men noodles. These processed noodles were a double win, being extremely cheap and providing a dramatically satisfying crunch. The entire hot, creamy, savory mixture was either served over or mixed with the noodles just before serving. The resulting high starch and salt content successfully stretched the small amount of expensive protein and creamy soup across all 6 servings, creating a dense, crunchy, and surprisingly flavorful meal that delivered maximum satiety for minimal cost. This collection of frugal Canadian feasts highlights the resourcefulness of past generations. These 60s, 70s, and 80s meals were the dependable backdrop to family life, using cheap carbohydrates and ingenuity to stretch small protein portions. They proved a family of 6 could be fed, warm, and happy. Their legacy is a blend of love and practicality. Don't miss the next slice of history. Subscribe to feed your inner nostalgia.